Kelvak scratched his three-eyed head with a tentacle that had seen better days. The coffee-colored liquid in his mug had gone cold hours ago, but that was the least of his problems. The Galactic Census Bureau wasn't exactly known for its exciting work environment, but today was shaping up to be one hell of a headache. "Another data corruption incident?" asked Nilla, his cubicle neighbor, her voice dripping with the kind of sarcasm that came from 20 years of government work. Her purple scales shimmered under the fluorescent lighting as she leaned over the partition that separated their workstations. "Worse," Kelvak muttered, his primary eye focused on the holographic display while his other two watched for their supervisor. "Remember that species we supposedly wiped from the records 3 cycles ago? The ones from that backwater system, Sol?" Nilla's laugh was sharp and bitter. "You mean the bipedal mammals? What did they call themselves? Humans." She pronounced it like it tasted bad. "Yeah, I remember. Complete data purge. Every file, every reference, every trace of their existence. Gone. As if they never existed." "Well," Kelvak's voice dropped to a whisper, "they're back." The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a plasma blade. Nilla's coffee mug froze halfway to her lips. Her secondary hearts probably stopped beating for a moment. "What do you mean back?" she asked slowly. Kelvak's tentacles danced across the holographic interface, pulling up files that shouldn't exist. 3 separate star systems reported contact yesterday. "Not just contact, Nilla. These humans are trading, negotiating, and apparently laughing at our bureaucracy." "That's impossible." Nilla's voice had lost all its sarcasm now. "The purge protocol is absolute. When the Council orders a species erased from galactic records, they stay erased. Their technology becomes inaccessible, their diplomatic channels close, their entire civilization becomes isolated until they die out. Tell that to Captain Elena Vasquez of the human vessel Defiant Spirit," Kelvak said, highlighting a communication log. "She just sold 30 tons of processed titanium to the Zephyrian Mining Consortium. It's at market price, in standard galactic credits." Nilla leaned closer, her breath smelling of fermented krill. "How is that possible? Their accounts should be frozen. Their language shouldn't even translate anymore." "Oh, it gets better." Kelvak's laugh had no humor in it. "According to this report from Station Delta 7, Captain Vasquez specifically asked the trade coordinator if they'd missed the memo about humanity being erased. When he said yes, she apparently patted him on the shoulder and said, 'Don't worry about it.' We've been getting that a lot lately." The implications hit Nilla like a meteor strike. "They know." "They know," Kelvak confirmed, "and they're treating it like some kind of cosmic joke." Before either of them could process this further, the unmistakable sound of expensive shoes on cheap flooring announced the arrival of Supervisor Gorlax. The massive Brutelian filled the doorway to their cubicle area, his 4 arms crossed in a way that suggested someone was about to have a very bad day. "Kelvak," Gorlax's voice rumbled like distant thunder, "report to Conference Room 7. Now." "Sir, I can explain." "No explanations. Move." The walk to Conference Room 7 felt like a death march. Kelvak's tentacles left small puddles of nervous sweat on the polished floor. When the doors slid open, he found himself facing the most terrifying sight in the galaxy. A room full of government officials who looked confused. Admiral Threx of the Galactic Enforcement Division sat at the head of the table, her crystalline exoskeleton reflecting the emergency lighting that had been activated. Director Voss from the Diplomatic Corps was frantically scrolling through reports on his tablet. And at the far end, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the universe, sat High Counselor Jaren. "Sit," Admiral Threx commanded. Kelvak sat so fast he nearly fell through the chair. "Explain to me," Admiral Threx began, her voice carrying the kind of authority that could stop a supernova, "how a species that was officially erased from existence 3 cycles ago just submitted a formal complaint about the cafeteria food at Intergalactic Station Prime." Kelvak blinked all three eyes in sequence. They what? Director Voss looked up from his tablet, his face pale even by Alterian standards. Captain Marcus Reed, representing the human diplomatic vessel Inevitable Return, filed a 14-page document detailing how the protein rations taste like recycled shoe leather dipped in sadness. He also included suggestions for improvement and offered to share something called pizza recipes. Pizza? High Councillor Jaron asked weakly. Apparently it's a food item involving bread, tomato sauce, and various toppings, Director Voss replied. Captain Reed specifically mentioned that it would be way better than whatever that green stuff is supposed to be. Admiral Threx's exoskeleton darkened, which was never a good sign. Let me understand this correctly. We erased an entire species from galactic civilization. We cut off their access to hyperspace routes, froze their accounts, severed their communication networks, and made it impossible for them to contact any other species in the galaxy. Yes, ma'am, Kelvak whispered. And now they're not only back, but they're filing complaints about our catering services. It appears so, ma'am. The silence that followed could have powered a small moon. High Councillor Jaron cleared his throat nervously. There might be complications. Admiral Threkex turned her attention to him with the speed of a predator spotting prey. What kind of complications? Well, Jaron began, wringing his hands. It seems the humans have been busy during their isolation period. Busy how? They've established trade relationships with 17 different species, set up mining operations in 12 star systems, and apparently invented something called coffee that has become wildly popular among deep space traders. Director Voss nodded grimly. The Alterian Merchant Guild is reporting record profits since they started selling human coffee. They're calling it liquid motivation. Coffee. Admiral Threx repeated the word like it was alien, which technically it was. A caffeinated beverage, Jaron explained. Apparently it helps organic beings stay alert for extended periods. The humans have been trading it for raw materials, information, and safe passage through various sectors. Kelvak watched the room's occupants process this information. It was like watching a slow-motion disaster unfold. So let me get this straight, Admiral Threx said, her voice dangerously quiet. We tried to erase humanity from galactic civilization, and instead we accidentally created the most successful black market operation in recorded history. That's one way to put it, Jaron admitted. And now they're back in official channels, filing paperwork and making jokes about it. The humans do seem to find humor in unusual situations, Director Voss confirmed. According to this report, when asked how they managed to maintain their civilization during the erasure period, Captain Reed simply said, "We're very stubborn. Also, we had really good coffee." Admiral Threkex stood up so suddenly that everyone else in the room flinched. "Get me a direct communication link with one of these human vessels. Now." "Bull." "Ma'am," Kelvak ventured carefully. "Which one?" "Any of them. I don't care if they're filing complaints or selling coffee or whatever else they're doing. I want to know how they did this." Director Voss was already working on his tablet. "I can establish a link with the Defiant Spirit. Captain Vasquez seems to be the most communicative of the human commanders we've encountered." "Do it." The holographic display in the center of the table flickered to life, and suddenly they found themselves looking at a human female. Captain Elena Vasquez was younger than Kelvak had expected, with dark hair pulled back in what humans apparently called a ponytail. She was sitting in what looked like a command chair, and there was something that might have been a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Well, Captain Vasquez said, her voice carrying an accent that the universal translator struggled with. "The Galactic Council wants to chat." "How unexpected." Admiral Threkex leaned forward. "Captain Vasquez, I trust you know why we're calling." "Oh, I have a few guesses," Vasquez replied, that almost smile becoming more pronounced. "But why don't you enlighten me?" "I do so love a good story." "You were erased from galactic records 3 cycles ago. Your species should not exist in our databases. Your ships should not be able to navigate hyperspace. Your accounts should be frozen, your communications blocked, and your civilization should be gone." Vasquez nodded thoughtfully. "Yeah, we got that memo. Eventually. Took us a while to figure out why all our regular trade routes suddenly went silent. Really put a damper on Tuesday." "Tuesday?" Jaren asked. "Human time unit," Vasquez explained helpfully. "Roughly equivalent to your standard work cycle. Though honestly, Tuesday being terrible is something of a universal constant in human culture." Admiral Threx's patience was clearly wearing thin. "How are you here?" Vasquez's smile became a full grin. "Oh, that's actually a really good story. See, the thing about humans is that we're incredibly good at one particular thing. Which is? We're spectacular at ignoring authority figures who tell us we can't do something." The room fell silent again. Kelvak watched Admiral Threx's exoskeleton cycle through several different colors, none of them pleasant. "You ignored the purge protocol?" Admiral Threx asked slowly. "Well, ignored is a strong word," Vasquez said, leaning back in her chair. "We prefer to think of it as creative interpretation. See, when you cut off our access to official hyperspace routes, we found unofficial ones. When you froze our accounts, we started bartering. When you blocked our communications, we got creative with signal bouncing." Director Voss was frantically taking notes. "But the isolation should have been complete. No species would risk dealing with an erased civilization." Vasquez laughed, and it was a sound that somehow managed to be both warm and slightly terrifying. "Here's the thing about galactic politics that you might have missed. There are a lot of species out there who aren't particularly fond of the Galactic Council." "That's impossible," High Counselor Jaren protested. "The Council represents the interests of all civilized species." "Aha." Vasquez's expression suggested she had opinions about that statement. "Tell that to the outer rim miners who've been getting taxed into poverty, or the independent traders who can't afford council licensing fees, or the refugee populations that the Council keeps relocating to less convenient star systems." Kelvak felt something cold settle in his stomach. This was not going according to any scenario they'd planned for. "What are you saying?" Admiral Threx asked. "I'm saying that when you erased us from official records, you accidentally introduced us to a whole network of beings who were already operating outside your system. And it turns out they really like coffee." The silence stretched until Director Voss cleared his throat nervously. "Captain Vasquez, what exactly do you want?" "Want?" Vasquez tilted her head. "That's an interesting question. What do we want?" She paused, as if considering the question seriously for the first time. "Well, for starters, we'd like our species restored to official records. It's been really inconvenient trying to explain to customs officials why we don't technically exist. Also, we'd like an apology." "An apology?" Admiral Threx's voice rose several octaves. "Sure, you tried to erase us from existence. That seems like the kind of thing that warrants a sorry about that at minimum." High Counselor Jaren leaned forward. "And if we refuse?" Vasquez's smile took on a different quality. It was still friendly, but there was something predatory about it now. "Well, that would be unfortunate. You see, during our 3 cycles of non-existence, we've made a lot of friends. Independent traders, mining consortiums, exploration fleets, research stations, even some of your own council member species have been dealing with us through back channels." She paused to let that sink in. It would be really embarrassing if word got out about how spectacularly the Purge Protocol failed. Especially since we've been documenting everything. Director Voss paled further. "Documenting?" "Oh yes, every interaction, every trade deal, every time a council official pretended not to know who we were while buying our coffee, we've kept very detailed records. Amazing what humans can accomplish when they're properly motivated." Admiral Threx was starting to look like she'd rather be fighting a space kraken than sitting in this conference room. Are you threatening the Galactic Council? Threatening? Vasquez looked genuinely surprised. Oh no, Admiral, we're not threatening anyone. We're negotiating. There's a difference. Which is, threats are what you do when you're angry. Negotiation is what you do when you're holding all the cards. The communication screen flickered as Captain Vasquez adjusted something off camera. When she returned, she was holding a steaming mug that smelled suspiciously like the legendary coffee everyone kept talking about. Now then, she said, taking a sip, where were we? Oh right, the part where you realize you accidentally gave humanity the best thing that ever happened to us. Kelvak watched Admiral Threx's exoskeleton shift to a shade of red that meant someone was about to get vaporized. Unfortunately, that someone was probably going to be him. Explain, Admiral Threx commanded. Gladly, Vasquez said, her eyes twinkling with what humans apparently called mischief. See, before you erased us, humanity was just another mid-level species trying to follow all your rules and regulations. We paid our taxes, filed our paperwork, and generally tried to be good galactic citizens. She paused for another sip of coffee. But when you cut us off from legitimate channels, you forced us to get creative. And humans? We're really good at creative problem solving. Director Voss was scribbling notes so fast his stylus was smoking. What kind of problem solving? Well, take hyperspace navigation, Vasquez said cheerfully. Your official routes are safe, regulated, and monitored. They're also slow, expensive, and predictable. So we started mapping our own routes through uncharted space. High Counselor Jaren looked like he was developing a headache. That's incredibly dangerous. The hyperspace storms alone. Oh, we lost a few ships at first, Vasquez admitted with a shrug. But humans learn fast. Especially when the alternative is sitting around feeling sorry for ourselves. Within 6 months, we'd mapped 17 new hyperspace corridors that cut travel time by 40%. The room was so quiet that Kelvak could hear his own nervous breathing. 40%, Admiral Threx repeated slowly, give or take. The route through the nebula of eternal screaming is particularly efficient, though the name is a bit dramatic. It's more like the nebula of mild complaining once you know how to navigate it properly. Director Voss looked up from his notes. You've been using unregulated hyperspace routes for 3 cycles. Using them, mapping them, and selling access to anyone who wants to cut their shipping costs in half, Vasquez confirmed. The independent traders love us. Turns out there are a lot of beings in this galaxy who'd rather not pay council route licensing fees. Kelvak felt his tentacles start to tremble. The economic implications of this were staggering. But that's not even the good part, Vasquez continued, apparently enjoying herself immensely. The real breakthrough came when we realized that being officially non-existent meant we were exempt from all those pesky galactic regulations. What regulations? Admiral Threx asked, though her tone suggested she really didn't want to know. Oh, you know. Import taxes, export permits, environmental impact assessments, diplomatic immunity protocols, all those rules that make legitimate business so complicated and expensive. The color drained from High Counselor Jaren's face. You've been operating completely outside the regulatory framework. Like I said, creative problem solving. When Captain Reed's ship needed repairs at Station Omega 5, he couldn't use official docking bays because humans don't exist. So he made a deal with the station's maintenance chief, fixed their entire waste recycling system in exchange for parts and docking privileges. That's, Director Voss struggled for words, that's completely irregular. It's also more efficient than your standard 6-week permit approval process, Vasquez pointed out. The maintenance chief was so impressed that he recommended us to 12 other stations. Word spreads fast when you actually solve problems instead of filing paperwork about them. Admiral Threx was gripping the edge of the table so hard that her claws were leaving marks. How many stations? Active repair contracts? Last count was around 300. But that number keeps growing. Apparently, human engineers have a reputation for making things work instead of explaining why they can't. Kelvak realized he was witnessing the collapse of everything he thought he knew about galactic civilization. The humans hadn't just survived their erasure, they'd used it to completely circumvent the system that was supposed to control them. "There's more, isn't there?" Admiral Threkax asked with the tone of someone expecting bad news. "Oh, so much more," Vasquez said happily. "Did you know that 70% of the Outer Rim mining operations are now using human-designed extraction equipment? We invented a plasma drill that's 3 times more efficient than standard Council-approved models." "How is that possible?" Director Voss demanded. "The Council Science Division has the galaxy's best researchers." Vasquez's laugh was genuinely amused. "Your Science Division has the galaxy's most cautious researchers. Every innovation has to go through 17 different approval committees and pass 43 safety protocols. By the time they approve a new technology, humans have already invented, tested, and improved it 6 different ways. Safety protocols exist for good reasons," High Councillor Jaron protested weakly. "Sure they do. But when you're trying to extract rare minerals from an asteroid that's about to be consumed by a stellar flare, you don't have time to wait for Committee Approval Form 7742B. You need equipment that works, and you need it now." She took another sip of coffee, clearly enjoying the growing panic in the room. "The Zephyrian Mining Consortium has been so happy with our equipment that they've started paying us in advance for designs we haven't even finished yet. Last month they offered us exclusive drilling rights to the Helios system in exchange for our new asteroid processor schematics." Admiral Threx's exoskeleton had turned a shade of red that Kelvak had never seen before. "The Helios system is restricted Council territory. Not according to the Zephyrians. They've been mining there for decades under some ancient treaty clause that nobody bothered to read properly. Turns out, being erased from official records means we're not bound by Council territorial restrictions either." The implications hit everyone in the room simultaneously. If humanity wasn't officially recognized, then they weren't bound by any of the treaties, agreements, or restrictions that governed galactic civilization. "You've been operating as a completely independent power," Director Voss said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Independent, unrestricted, and highly motivated," Vasquez agreed. "Amazing what humans can accomplish when you stop telling them what they can't do." Kelvak watched High Councillor Jaron realize that they hadn't just failed to erase humanity, they'd accidentally created a rival civilization that operated outside all normal constraints. "What do you want?" Admiral Threkax asked again, but this time her voice carried a note of desperation. "I told you already. Recognition and an apology." "Oh, and we'd like to keep our new trade routes and mining rights." "That's impossible. Those routes go through Council space. Those mining rights violate established territories." Vasquez shrugged. "Then I guess we'll just keep operating unofficially. Though it might get awkward when the news networks find out about this conversation." "News networks?" Director Voss looked sick. "Oh yes, the Galactic Broadcasting Corporation has been very interested in our story. Apparently, erased species returns to sue for better cafeteria food is the kind of headline that generates a lot of viewer interest." She smiled that predatory smile again. "We've scheduled an exclusive interview for next week. Captain Reed is particularly excited to discuss how Council bureaucracy nearly destroyed human civilization and how we survived by building our own economy from scratch." Admiral Threkax stood up so abruptly that her chair crashed to the floor. "You're trying to embarrass the Council." "Embarrass you?" Vasquez looked genuinely puzzled. "Admiral, you embarrassed yourselves." "We're just planning to tell everyone about it." The silence that followed was broken by a soft chime from Director Voss's tablet. "Ma'am," he said weakly, "I'm receiving reports from 17 different sectors. Human vessels are requesting official recognition for trade agreements, mining operations, and diplomatic relations." "How many vessels?" Admiral Threkax asked. Director Voss swallowed hard. "Current count is over 400 ships, and they're all filing their paperwork simultaneously. Vasquez grinned. Coordinated bureaucratic attack. We learned that one from watching council meetings. Sometimes the best weapon is proper documentation. Kelvak stared at the numbers scrolling across his workstation. Hundreds of human ships, thousands of trade agreements, mining rights in dozens of systems, diplomatic relationships with species across the galaxy. All of it documented, verified, and completely outside council oversight. This is impossible, High Councillor Jaren muttered. A single species can't build an entire shadow economy in 3 cycles. You're right, Vasquez agreed. A single species couldn't do it. But we didn't do it alone. She leaned forward, and her expression became serious for the first time. Here's what you missed, Council. When you erased us, you didn't just cut us off from your system. You also cut us off from your restrictions. We were free to make deals with anyone who wanted to work with us. And it turns out, there are a lot of beings in this galaxy who are tired of being told what they can and can't do. Admiral Threkex sank back into her chair. How many species? Active partnerships. 43 species across 62 systems. Trade relationships? Over 200 species. Military defense agreements. Vasquez paused dramatically. Well, let's just say that if the Council decides to try the Purge Protocol again, it won't just be humanity you'll be erasing. The room fell completely silent. Even the soft hum of the life support systems seemed to fade away. You've built an alliance, Director Voss whispered. We've built a family, Vasquez corrected. Beings who work together because we want to, not because some council tells us we have to. Species who share resources and knowledge because cooperation works better than regulation. She stood up, and for the first time since the conversation began, her expression was completely serious. So here's your choice, Council. You can officially recognize humanity and work with us as equals. You can learn from what we've built and maybe improve your own system. Or you can keep pretending we don't exist while we continue building a better galaxy without you. Admiral Threx looked around the room at the faces of her colleagues. Kelvak could see the moment when she realized they were beaten. And if we choose the second option? She asked quietly. Vasquez's smile returned, but this time it was warm instead of predatory. Then, in another few cycles, when your trade revenues have dropped by 50% and your best scientists have joined our research initiatives, and when every independent species in the galaxy is asking why they need Council permission to live their lives, well, you'll probably call us again. She picked up her coffee mug and raised it in a mock toast. But next time we might not be quite so interested in negotiating. After all, we've got coffee, better technology, and a proven track record of making impossible things work. The communication ended, leaving the room in stunned silence. Kelvak looked around at the shattered remains of everything he'd believed about galactic politics. The humans had turned their Resha into the greatest success story in recent history. They'd built an entire civilization outside Council control, and now they were offering to share it. Well, Admiral Threx said finally, her voice hollow, I suppose we should draft that apology. High Councillor Jaren nodded weakly. And schedule a press conference. We'll need to explain how the Purge Protocol evolved into a diplomatic initiative. Director Voss was already working on his tablet. I'll start preparing recognition documents. Though I suspect Captain Vasquez will want to review the terms personally. Kelvak sat in his chair, watching the most powerful beings in galactic government scramble to fix a mistake that had accidentally created their biggest competition. Somewhere out there, humans were probably laughing about this over cups of coffee, planning their next impossible project. And for the first time in his career, Kelvak found himself wondering what that coffee actually tasted like. Maybe being erased from existence wasn't the worst thing that could happen to a species. Maybe it was the best.